In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Hello, and welcome to part 2 of our conversation about having a pilgrim mindset. So we had a couple of more questions that we wanted to discuss. And the first one that we wanted to jump into was, in a world surrounded by a lot of fretting, what concerns are we freed from when we are simply pilgriming through this world? So Lauren, would you like to get us started on this?
Sure, because I get to talk about one of my husband's favorite ways to determine whether something is worth worrying about.
Oh,
and that is what he called the 5,000-year test. He said, if you're going to worry about this in 5,000 years, then it is a good use of your worry and your effort and your fretting now. If you're not going to care about it in 5,000 years, don't care about it today either. So the way that I raise my kids, yeah, I'm going to be concerned with that in 5,000 years. The stock market and how it does today, it might be big and scary and impressive right now, but I'm not going to care about it in 5,000 years. So I'm not going to spend my time worrying about it now. And so all that to say, I think one of the big things that the pilgrim mindset gives me is that eternal perspective. That I don't have to worry about, oh no, I only have 70 years or 80 years to make my mark on this. No, I have forever. I have forever and ever to do the one thing that is important. And that's praising God and bringing him glory. And as long as that's my focus, I get to do that forever and ever, amen. And I don't have to worry about running out of time on that, as long as my focus is on those things that are important.
There's always going to be a to-do list, and most of it doesn't matter unless it's, I like that. That's easy to remember. 5,000 years. Yes. That's a great test. Will I care about it? Because really, yeah, is this something eternal? Is this something eternal? What were your thoughts, Jennifer? What are we freed from in terms of the things that we're concerned about as Christians?
Well, I think for me, and I think I'm probably not alone, there's been times when I've either watched the news or thought about politics or just even worried about my own future. And there can be a lot of fear if we get too caught up into all the what ifs or even the what is currently happening. But when I think about just being a visitor here on earth and God being the one that is in control, it's not mine to control. I can focus on just being a good steward of the gifts that God gave me and praying to him to give me wisdom, but ultimately know that it's not my home here. And I think that's very freeing. I think of it like I can control what's within my control and then leave the rest for God. He's the one that's in control when I'm not. And the verse that I go to when I am feeling afraid, or one verse I go to remember that God is in control, is Isaiah 41:10. It says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And I know those words weren't written for us, but I think it exemplifies the character of God towards his people. So as one of his people, I can rest in that.
That was the verse that I quoted during labor with my first child.
Oh.
I don't think I was quoting verses during labor. You're a better woman than me.
That was the one I gritted down to. I will be with you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand.
Yes.
Love it. I love it. We in our sermon on Sunday, Edwin Crozier talked about the practice he has of remembering that God is God. And so he suggested to us that we take 20 minutes, and I needed it today. It seems like whenever I'm assigned a conversation, like something happens during the day that puts me to the test to see if, it's like a trial run or something. And so things were going sideways. And so I remembered what my preacher said. And so I sat in a chair for about 20 minutes and remembered that God was God. And that, I've always wondered about those verses, ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name, ascribe. And there's probably better verbs, but this idea of not literally putting God back on his throne, but just remembering that God is God. And so every one of the things that keep us up at night, every one of the things that steal the joy from us or that we're afraid of, just being still, being silent, and telling God, I acknowledge you're in control. I acknowledge that you are driving this. I am not, and I'm resting in the peace of your wisdom of how you're going to handle this. And I was a new woman after 20 minutes of just silence, but, just prayerful, humbling myself. I was reborn in 20 minutes. So as we're struggling to maintain this mindset, I would really suggest that in addition to your Bible study, but just being still and remember that God is God. Dana, what are your thoughts on this?
I think what I probably struggle with the most is the declining moral atmosphere and the fear of that, and the fear for my children and the fear for my grandchildren and even my great grandchildren. And I try and remind myself throughout the scriptures, we see God's people functioning as God's people in very difficult governmental situations. And in our world, there are Christians all around the world who are faithful to God, in communist countries, in socialist countries, in democracies, in just corrupt nonsense everywhere. And that, it all comes back to God is God and He's in control. And I think it's just important for us to think about, I can be a Christian anywhere. In prison, Paul was. He did some of his greatest writings from prison. I can do that. I can endure whatever God decides I can endure. And that is a huge comfort for me. Not that I want to face any of that, right. But I can. And I'm reminded of the scripture in Romans 8, verse 37 says, we are more than conquerors.
Yeah.
And we are, and we can always be if He's on our side. And that, if we sit with that, like you said you did today with other things, I think it is for me, it just reminds me, okay, if the word, and that's always my solution anytime I'm fretting over anything, what's the worst that can happen? That is, and I always figure out the worst that can happen and figure out how I'm going to get through that. Yeah. And it rarely is the worst. And so, but that helps me deal with stuff. And the worst that can happen is I die and go to heaven.
Right. So, and if you're in prison, Paul shows us what to do.
Yeah.
Yes, there's kind of a healthy detachment. I noticed this when Isla and I were touring Israel back in June together. We had this great tour guide named Zach, and he would grab the microphone and he kind of shared it with Luke Chandler. Always fascinating information. But among the things that he told us about Israel was like all of their military challenges, with all the hostility on the borders and all these moving stories about the wars that they've been through and all of this, but as much as he was touching my heart, there was never at any point was I thinking that I was taking on his problems, that the countries, there was this sort of detachment that, oh, my heart goes out to you. You have a lot to deal with here. And so I think as our citizenship, as we talked about in our previous conversation, in part 1, our citizenship is in heaven. There's a very healthy sort of like if everyone's going nuts around us, if our hope is fixed on things above, even if everything goes sideways, the truth is what matters most cannot be lost. What matters most, even if the worst case scenario you can think of, what matters most cannot be lost. God holds us in the palm of his hand. So to me, that is very freeing to realize that my well-being doesn't depend on the outcome of the United States of America, or whatever, that kind of thing. So any other thoughts? Jennifer, did you have anything you wanted to throw in here this being freed?
I was just thinking when you said he holds us in the palm of his hand, that he is in control and it's this vast world, but yet it says our names are engraved, in his palm, and he, rejoices over us. He sings over us. He knows the hairs of our head, like all the beautiful language about how God sees us, no matter what is going on in the world or with us personally. God sees us and he knows us, and he knows even our heart, even the things that no one else around us would know. And that is very comforting in stressful times. And just was reminded of that when you talked about the palm of his hand.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you guys are bringing up ideas about ways that our sisters can be comforted as they get back to that pilgrim mindset, because there's a lot going on in the culture right now. And so, I appreciate that as a very, very practical thing. Lauren, did you have any other thoughts you'd like to add to this?
I did, because what I keep coming back to as a younger, older woman, we'll go with that.
That's fair.
I'm the mom, right? I have a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I'm the mom. Yeah. And now as I'm embarking on the single mom adventure, everything falls back on me. Somebody's got to make supper. It's on me. The kids are out of clean clothes. That's on me. Have the kids done their homework yet? I've got to figure that out. We've got XYZ place to be. I'm the chauffeur. Like everything we talked a few minutes ago about the never ending to-do list. Everything, it feels like, falls on me and falls on my shoulders. And what a comfort it is. There is legitimacy to that. There is a lot of responsibility to being a wife and being a mother and running a household and all of that. And yes, I actually do have to wash the clothes, and I actually do have to go to the grocery store, and I actually do have to do all of the things. But there's also this freedom but ultimately I'm not the one running the show. Ultimately, I am not the one, I've seen the meme on Facebook and whatnot about, I realized it was time for dinner and I waited for mom to call me for dinner, and then I realized that I am mom and I'm the one who has to cook dinner. Yeah. And there are times when I'm just like, I just want somebody else to be in charge for a little bit. My kids will come and ask me for something, and I'm like, I am decisioned out. I don't know. Go figure something out. But at the end of all of that is God saying, don't stress about it. It's okay. I've got it under control. You're going to be okay. And that my anxiety and my fear is much closer to home a lot of times. I stress out and I panic over the overwhelming responsibilities that I have. And so part of that pilgrim mindset is God saying, you can handle the important stuff. I think of Mary and Martha. You know, Mary has chosen the most important thing. Yes, the dishes have to get done, but Mary's found what's important. And I think for me and for others who might be in similar little kid kind of situations, which mine aren't even that little anymore, just that freedom of, it feels like it's never going to end. And it feels like everything falls on my shoulders. But I know that I have God holding me up and keeping me upright and keeping me going.
That is a heavy burden. as a woman who's, Mark is Mr. Logistics. Yeah, I can't even imagine that. I mean, I'm thinking insurance. That's where I get, like, insurance, taxes, all of this complicated contracts and things like that. I can't even imagine, but I admire the grace with which you carry that load and take on the responsibilities of Sacred Selections, heading that organization up, and raising teenagers. So juggler.
Pray for me.
Yeah, you have my prayers.
Yes.
I got your learning.
I think one thing we have to, that for Lauren and Lauren's out there is, people like us and Cindy. I mean, we've gotten through a lot of the raising kids and the chaos of it and the responsibility and overwhelming responsibilities, and you can too. And I think with God's grace and His mercy, we can all walk through this. You know, it astounds me to look back at what I did, but it wasn't just what I did. And I still have my husband, so that certainly was not a factor in my life. But I think there are many mothers, that we are overwhelmed with life because it is such a busy, 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 hectic time. And, but you can do it with God's help. You can get through it.
Heather.
This makes me think of a verse in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 7. I think whenever I used to think about the wilderness wanderings, right? That's always what we call it when we do the little memory aid, right? The wandering in the wilderness. Yeah. To me, that always had the connotation of aimlessness. But their wanderings were guided. They didn't move until the pillar of cloud came up off the tabernacle and they followed it. And it wasn't as though they didn't know where the promised land was. They knew they had been there once before, or at least, 12 of them had been. So this a whole idea of this guided wandering. But in Deuteronomy 2:7, it says, "For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He knows you're trudging through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing." So I love that trudging through. It can also be translated as sojourn or journey. But I love the idea of trudging through because Lauren, I still have kids at home too. There are days when I feel like, oh my goodness, I'm just doing the next right thing in front of me. What is the next right thing? Oh, that's right. We need to eat. I will make a dinner. Now, what is the next right thing? Right? Like that is all I can do. But in the wilderness, that was all they had to do. And God knew it. God knew their circumstances. He didn't expect of them in the wilderness what he was going to expect of them in the promised land. Exactly. And that frees me from a lot of worrying, just to know that God knows my circumstances and he's going to make sure I don't lack. And that might look like years of manna. That's what it might look like for a while. And that's okay. I still will survive. And all that time when they were in the wilderness, they were building this faith that they were definitely going to need once they got to the promised land. And you can't just take a group of people and go, okay, look, you're going to walk around these walls. Don't say anything. Do it for 6 days. On the seventh day, you're going to walk around, scream and shout, and the walls are just going to fall. Like, you don't hit somebody cold with that. You got to build them up to that level of faith. And so when I think about even that part of my trudging through, that this isn't just one weary step in front of the other so that I can crawl across the finish line. This is God preparing me for whatever work I have to do in the promised land. This is all preparation. He's getting rid of things in me that aren't serving me, aren't serving him. And that mindset, I think, just flips the script in my head when I do encounter times of suffering, that this isn't some God that's just making me endure it for the sake of enduring it. He's perfecting me for future work. And that's very exciting to me.
Amen.
You know, the other thing that came up in my mind was something that I saw, or a friend shared with me on Facebook. She had found this quote that said, "We're raising warriors. Did we not expect there would be a war?" And I thought, what? Are you kidding me? Yes, right? I mean, we sing the song, Soldiers of Christ Arise. We read the verses. We make the cute little outfits for the kids in Bible class when we get to Ephesians 6, right? But then we're shocked when the world fights back. Like, I don't need to worry about that. I've been preparing for it, right? That's part of having this, I'm a stranger, I'm an alien here mindset. I know it's going to be against me. So that has been just having that in my head. You know, we're raising warriors. Did we not expect there to be a war? That has just been helpful in arranging my thoughts. I'm teaching a class right now to high schoolers at our homeschool co-op on C.S. Lewis. And we read Abolition of Man over Christmas break. So you know how they tell lawyers, don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to? Well, I assigned a book I had not read. And once I read it, went, oh my God, this is really hard.
It's the hardest book you wrote. That is the hardest one.
It's so hard.
Yes.
And God was so good to me because in my limited knowledge, I had arranged our syllabus that we would read Abolition of Man and then we would follow it up with That Hideous Strength. Well, in Abolition of Man, this goes back to our discussion on the culture, kind of Western civilization goes to the doctor in Abolition of Man, and the diagnosis is you're really sick, and then the prognosis is you're terminal, right? And it ends very depressing. But in That Hideous Strength, all the theory of Abolition of Man plays out in that book. And at the end of that book, God wins. So I really wanted the kids, I mean, I've got kids who will be voting for the first time this year. I wanted them to know if your hope's in Western civilization, this is going to be a very tough year for you. Election years are notoriously ugly. There's a lot of mud being flung around. Everything is the most dire of terms, right? But if your hope is in Jesus, then you've won. And you can be sad that your mission field is messy and awful and declining. That's fair. That's a reflection of God's heart. But remember that you, to your verse, Dana, are more than a conqueror. We have already won. So again, having that pilgrim mindset keeps our chin up, keeps us with that kind of victorious attitude so that we're not going to be given over to doom and gloom.
And there's so much waiting on the Lord involved in what you're talking about. As you're enduring with courage, the kind of courage that you've described, you know you're more than a conqueror. But you're in the present circumstance. You are waiting on the Lord. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this concept and how this plays into the pilgrim mindset. So Psalms 27, 13 and 14 is one verse that talks about waiting for the Lord. And there it says, I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes. Wait on the Lord. So, Jennifer, what does waiting on the Lord mean to you?
Well, I know this has been my theme in our part 1, and I'm carrying it over here. But to me, waiting on the Lord, from what I read in the scriptures, really has to do with trusting God to take care of me in all situations in the way that's best from an eternal perspective. And then I have to trust that even when from my perspective, it may not look good. The verse that I thought of is Psalms 46:10, which the first part of that verse is be still and know that I am God. So that idea that I can trust, as we talked about in the first part, I believe it was, that God is God and I am not. And he knows the past, the present, the future. He knows the very best outcome for my soul and other souls. And then I think that's the part of the verse we like to quote the most, but the rest of the verse says, I will be exalted among the nations. Mm-hmm. I will be exalted in the earth. So to me, waiting on the Lord is about being still and trusting that he's in control and using that time to him whatever way I can glorify him. I was thinking when you were talking, Heather, about in the wilderness that, eating manna and waiting several days for water, we were pretty critical of the Israelites that they started complaining when they'd been 3 days trudging in the wilderness with no water. But I imagine I would have complained too. But God did expect them to follow him and to keep a joyful, non-complaining spirit and to trust in him. And that came from that trusting in him, not looking back like Lot's wife, but trusting in him. And along those lines, Romans 8:28, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And I think sometimes we hear that verse taken to mean that, some people will use that verse as if everything on this earth will work together for good. And I think everybody, on this episode and listening knows that is just not the way the world works. But all things don't always feel like they are working together for good, but we can trust God that they are working together for good, again, from that eternal perspective and in a way that glorifies him.
Yes, an eternal perspective. And we talked about, I don't know if it was in this conversation or the one before it, how your mind wants to veer off of that. And I love what Lauren said when she's talking about her struggles managing the work of at least 2 people, if not 3. How she at times is successful about noticing that she doesn't necessarily have to stay in the negativity. That sometimes you got to feel it and grieve it and all of that. But then there's other times where I have this task, that task, and I can still keep, as you often say, Jennifer, keep doing the next right thing. But choose a shift in your mindset, like when we're teenage drivers, aiming high, looking up this way. Dana, did you have any thoughts on waiting upon God?
I looked at Psalm 37 and verse 34, and it starts off, wait on the Lord. But then the next phrase is, and keep his way, and he shall exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you shall see it. And I just want to kind of key in on wait on the Lord and keep his way. When I reflect on my own life, waiting on the Lord often is when I don't understand why this is happening this way, or why I'm having to go through this, or why did this happen to me. But what I do know from personal experiences, I just need to keep his way. I just need to keep on doing what I know is right. I think somebody said, doing the next right step all the time. And that's to me, waiting on the Lord, just living moment by moment, and then know that he will exalt me someday. And it may not, and it probably won't be in this earth, but he will. I mean, it's all about this eternal perspective. But I don't have to understand why this is happening. I don't have to know what's coming next. I just have to to tomorrow do what he says for me to do, and later this evening do what he tells me to do, and the next time and the next day, and just do what's right day by day and hour by hour. And I think it's hard not to think about Job. He never did know why he was in the situation he was in. We know why, but he never knew. And the answer he got from God was, you just got to trust me. And there are things that have happened in my life. I don't know that I will, at least on this side of eternity, will know why. But I just have to trust God, and I just have to keep doing, even when I don't want to do, and even when I don't feel like doing, do the next right thing. I think about going to church and worshiping. There have been times in my life that it's like, seriously, I remember when my kids were young, and when they were really young, and I would go to church and be outside more than I was inside. And I would think, I don't know why I even came today. Well, I do know why I went, and you know why you went, but it was hard. And there are times that we don't understand things, and that's a very simplistic thing. But we don't understand why some of us have other burdens than the other person, and et cetera, et cetera. But I do know this: I don't want your life, and you don't want mine. But God knows what each of us needs. And I've learned, Lord, just you give me what I need, and they can have their problems. And I don't mean that in an ugly way. I'm just saying, we don't need to compare our lives with everybody else's.
Absolutely.
You've got enough on your plate, and I've got enough on mine. And God knows which ones I can handle and which ones you can handle. And I don't have an understanding of it all, but I just need to keep his way every day. And
let go of that why. Letting go of what's none of our business. I think we've talked about that. And because anything that's a mental spinning of the wheels that you can't know the why, that is a waste of energy, and that will take your joy.
It will.
And so instead of why, it's more like, how would I obtain the favor of God by responding to this in a way that makes him smile upon my life? Using
keep
every
his way. Keep his way.
So Lauren, will you wrap this up for us and give us your thoughts about waiting upon God?
I will, because my thoughts are a little depressing.
Okay.
Because I think part of waiting is being ready. When I tell my kids, get ready to go, and they say, but Mom, we're waiting on you. Okay, if you don't have your shoes on, you're not waiting on me. I'm waiting on you. When you are waiting, you better be ready to go, because that's part of the definition of waiting. And I think it's easy for us to get stuck here. It's easy for us to get stuck thinking about the things that we have to do here and the obligations that we have here. And part of waiting on the Lord, when God calls me home, when it's time for me, I got places to be, I got people to go see, I got stuff to do, and I am ready. Now, that doesn't mean that I, am suicidal or whatever. That doesn't mean that I'm prematurely ending things here. But if I'm a pilgrim here, and if I'm waiting on God, okay, is my bus here yet? Is it time to go? Okay, I've got some time, so I'm going to go do some other things first. But I'm paying attention, because when my bus comes, I'm going to get on it. And when God calls for me, I'm going to go. And I think it saddens my heart when I see Christians sometimes who we get so used to being here in this world, and we forget how much better the place where we're going is. And so for me, a big part of waiting on the Lord is being ready and saying, okay, I've got stuff to do, but I've got my shoes on. Whenever you get here, I've got my shoes on. We're ready to go.
Yes.
I love that,
Ready
Lauren.
to
That's
go
great.
at all times. And I think a lot
That
of,
reminds me of the hymn, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And it's all about putting on Christ. While we're waiting, that putting on of the shoes and all of that, we're putting on the beauty of Christ, right? The beauty of the fruits of the Spirit. That's how we're getting ready. That's how we're washing, our garments in the blood of Christ, that we're purifying ourselves. We're his bride. We're purifying ourselves for his return. We're keeping oil in that lamp, right? Always eager and ready and anticipating the timing of his return. And really his time is the best time, no matter what we're talking about, his return, that it's the timing of God, waiting upon him. There's a reason why we're waiting. It's because his timing is best. So anything else that anyone wants to throw into this conversation before we wind things up? Not so much?
I did have
Jennifer?
one other character that I thought of when I was thinking about just waiting and pilgriming, if we have time for me to tell this story. For me, sometimes in my season of waiting, it sounds easy to say, just look to Jesus, fix your eyes on Jesus, do the next right thing. But sometimes the reality is life is not that cut and dried, and you're not exactly sure what to do next. And so you're praying for wisdom. And so I love the story of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, in 2 Chronicles 20, when the great multitude was coming against him for battle. And it says in verse 3 that Jehoshaphat was afraid, and he set his face to seek the Lord. And he praised the Lord. And then in verse 12, he humbly acknowledges, for we are powerless against this great horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And so many times I have prayed a prayer, Lord, I do not know what to do, but my eyes are on you, and just prayed for wisdom. And I think when we're waiting and when we're pilgriming, again, that's a comforting thing, that God will guide us and take care of us when we don't know what to do.
Just that beautiful profession of our dependence upon God and upon him only for all that is good.
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely thought to end on, Jennifer. Appreciate that. I appreciate every one of you staying late tonight. So we did a double header tonight, part 1 and part 2. And I think part 2 was just as stellar as part 1. So I know the words that you've had, that you've shared with us, are really going to benefit your sisters in their pilgriming on this earth. So thank you so much, ladies, for volunteering your time for these sisters that we love so much, all these viewers that will take your words and find courage along with the word of God. So thank you, viewers, for joining us for this Older Women Likewise program, and we will see you next time. God bless.
Good night.
Bye.